Hey guys, today we're going to look at Glenmorangie's entire core range. That's Glenmorangie Original, Glenmorangie Lasanta, Glenmorangie Quinta Ruban, and Glenmorangie Nectar D'or. Now all of these start with bourbon barrels, or specifically ex-bourbon barrels from Missouri. So these barrels first go to American distilleries. Well, they'll be filled with whiskey. It becomes bourbon. After the bourbons come to age and the barrels are dumped, these casks, these wood staves, are all sent to Glenmorangie over in Scotland, where they're filled with their wonderful new make spirit, which comes from the tallest stills in Scotland. These stills are very tall, very skinny at the necks. Think of them like giraffe necks. It allows a lot of reflux to come down, helps shape that spirit. First thing you'll see after 10 years is Glenmorangie Original. This is 10 years old, bottled at 43% ABV. Thank you for doing that instead of the standard 40%. For me, 43% is a great base ABV. Doesn't come across too thin. Anyway, I'm ranting now. Glenmorangie 10-year-old, or Glenmorangie Original as it's referred to, like I said, spends a decade at least in bourbon barrels. Now I've heard Glenmorangie only uses barrels twice, and that retains as much of the barrel character as can be. There's first fill and then there's refill, and after that they're tossed or sold off, who knows what. But let's start with Glenmorangie Original. Look at the color on that. It's very pale, and it's an indicator that Glenmorangie does not add color to their whiskey. Now right off the bat, there is a wonderful vanilla, orange peel. There's a little bit of a floral and fruity quality about it as well. Light toffee. It's a very light spirit, as you can tell, but it's very, very influenced by those bourbon casks. There's a little bit of coconut back in there. Let's taste. It's a very soft, sweet entry with a little spice on the background, a little nutmeg. It's got some coconut, toasted coconut specifically. There's a little toffee that adds that sweetness in the beginning. It's very creamy is what I find. So it doesn't come across as thin. That spice builds up a little bit. I wouldn't call it a spicy whiskey, but it's a nicely balanced whiskey. There's a little bit of creaminess, there's a little sweetness, there's a little bit of a floral note back there, and there's a little bit of spice. It all works together beautifully. The finish is sort of sweet and spicy in terms of the level of spice that you find on the palate. So again, not an overly spicy whiskey. I wouldn't even call it a spicy whiskey, but it's there. Glenmorangie Original is sort of the base, in essence, of what we're moving to next. So the next three whiskeys we're going to look at are considered Glenmorangie's extra matured range, which means they'll spend most of their life, 10 to 12 years in some cases, in ex-bourbon barrels. And then they'll spend 2 years or so maturing in wine casks of different types. The next whiskey we're looking at is Glenmorangie the Lasanta. This is a 12-year-old malt that, again, started its life in bourbon barrels, just like Glenmorangie Original, and then matured for a couple of years in hand-selected ex-sherry casks. Like Glenmorangie Original, this is bottled at 43%. So I love that they're keeping the bottling proof sort of above the standard 40%. And look at the color. The color is so richer compared to Glenmorangie Original. And the sherry barrels that they're sourcing are from Spain, which adds a lovely spice and fruit quality to it. Think gingerbread, dried fruit, a little nuttier than I thought. along with like a darker toffee character. Let's try it. Compared to Glenmorangie Original, it's much richer. So you have this nice wave of this sort of dried fruit sweetness and intensity with some darker toffee. There's a little bit of vanilla, and all of a sudden this nice wave of spice, baking spices sort of hit. The finish continues the tradition of fruit sweetness and spice. So in that sense, it's what you find in a nose very much carries over to the palate. In terms of this versus malts that were aged completely in sherry casks, I find at this age, I find a bit more complexity here because of the bourbon barrels, whatever the bourbon barrels brought to this, in addition to the couple of years of secondary aging or finishing in sherry casks. I think you sort of get the best of both worlds here. Compared to Glenmorangie Original, Glenmorangie Lasanta is a much richer, fuller bodied, fruitier, and spicier version. It's really, really good. So next up is Glenmorangie the Quinta Ruban, or Quinta Ruban, I don't know, sue me. So this is a 14-year-old whiskey that's been finished in port casks. It spends most of its life in ex-bourbon barrels and spends a couple of years in port casks. Things changed a little bit recently. So for years and years and years, it was a 12-year-old whiskey, which meant about 10 years in bourbon casks and 2 years in port casks. Now it's 14 years old. That doesn't mean it spends 4 more years or 2 more years in port casks. It means it spends about 12 years or so in ex-bourbon barrels, refill barrels, and just about 2 years in port casks. Something else to take note of, Glenmorangie Quinta Ruban is 46% ABV as opposed to 43% of the other two. And also, this is non-chill filtered. What does that mean? That means when they're going to, before they bottle the whiskey and proof it down, they do not lower the temperature and filter out the fatty acids. So if you add some ice or some cold water to it, your whiskey might cloud up a little bit. That doesn't affect the flavor so much. I say that, but there's a whole thing. We'll get into it some other time. Now's not the time. But let's get to tasting. And then look at the color on that deep ruby red. So compared to the other two, this is a bolder character about it. Could be the ABV, but I think it's due more in part to the port casks that are used. So there's still that fruitiness, there's a savoriness, there's a dark sort of chocolate type of note here. Dark toffees. There's a slight cigar box thing going on. Let's taste. Oh, that's good. So the port casks really add a darker, bolder character to this whiskey. It starts off with those toffee notes, those darker toffee notes. It adds some dark fruit, but also adds sort of a dark chocolatey sort of note. There's a little bit of spice sprinkled in and some dark tobacco leaf happening on the back. A little bit of a savory, earthy quality. Not as much spice. There's some spice in here, some baking spice, kind of like a nutmeg, allspice sort of thing, but nothing like Glenmorangie Lasanta. That is a lot more baking spice. This, the spice sort of is sprinkled in to help round out the whiskey. The finish, isn't as long as I think I'd like, but it still carries out that slightly savory, slightly fruity quality of the whiskey. It's really good. And finally, we end with Glenmorangie Nectar D'or. This is, again, aged in ex-bourbon barrels and finished in French Sauterne casks. Sauterne's a French dessert wine. The color, still very pale, but just a hair darker than Glenmorangie Original. Again, Glenmorangie does not add color or caramel coloring to their whiskeys. The nose is very sumptuous and sweet. You get some of those caramel qualities. You get a nice fruity quality. There's a fresh baked bread character about this too. Some lemon peel. It smells rich. Kind of invites you in. It's sort of an after dinner type of whiskey. This is also 46% ABV, also non-chill filtered. This whiskey also changed from before. It used to have a 12-year-old age statement that's been taken away. Does it hurt or hinder the whiskey? I don't think so. Thinking about the last time I tried this whiskey, it feels very, very much the same quality and character of that age-dated whiskey. Let's try it. Really good. So the nose really informed us here, again, on the palate. It starts off very rich, very luscious, sweet bread. Not sweet breads, but sweet baked goods. There's a little bit of vanilla. There's a little bit of fruitiness. There's some lemon peel. There's a nice creamy character about this as well. The finish, that's my only sort of point of contention. The finish on the other whiskeys range from medium to long. This one's slightly short of that, but it's still, satisfying. It still carries on that sort of sweet, rich quality that was found on the palate. So to recap, Glenmorangie Original is a fantastic place to start, especially if you're a bourbon drinker looking to get into single malts and such, solely because it's only aged in ex-bourbon casks. So you get some of that bourbon quality added to that single malt distillate that Glenmorangie puts out. If you're looking for something a little bit spicier, a little bit fruitier, Lasanta is a good place to go. If you're looking for something a little bit darker and bolder, Quinta Ruban is a good place to look. And if you want something decadent and luscious and sweet, Nectar D'or, that's where you want to go. You can almost think of these as a 4-course dinner if you're tasting these in succession. Glenmorangie, the original, is a good aperitif. It's a way to whet your appetite. And then Lasanta gets you going with this nice and spicy, fruity character. And then you get into something big and meaty and dark with Quinta Ruban. And then you end it with a nice, luscious dessert type of whiskey with Nectar D'or. I mean, in terms of value, ranging from $30-ish to $65 or so, I don't think there's a more bang for your buck range out there than Glenmorangie's Core Range. If you've had these whiskeys and you like them, comment below. If you don't like them, comment below. Let me know what you think. Otherwise, I'll see you later. Cheers.